Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi, anda bersama saya Nabilah, Khaleeda dan ini Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa pada jam ini kita akan berikan laporan berita bisnes, kewangan dan juga ekonomi dalam negara termasuklah negara. Jadi kita mulakan dengan perkembangan ini di mana ketika tarif perdagangan baharu Presiden Donald Trump ke atas China, Mexico dan Kanada bermula mencetuskan satu lagi perang perdagangan, negara-negara dalam rantaian bekalan global yang kompleks dan bersepadu di Asia berada dalam garis silang. Negara Asia termasuk Malaysia berdagang secara besar dengan Amerika Syarikat. Pada Februari sahaja, Malaysia mengeksport sejumlah 3.9 bilion ringgit ke Amerika Syarikat. Kepimpinan Trump menyenaraikan 15 buah negara yang bakal dikenakan tarif dikenali sebagai Dirty 15. Trump mencadangkan tarif menyasarkan sektor seperti semikonduktor, farmaseutical, keluli dan aluminium. Firma kajian Nomura menjagakan lebih suku ekspor dari Korea Selatan, Jepun, Malaysia, Filipina dan Taiwan mungkin terjejas. Malaysia, Korea Selatan dan Thailand lebih terikat dengan rantaian bekalan Amerika Utara, menjadikan mereka terdedah kepada tarif ke atas Kanada dan Mexico. Di Malaysia, 0.59% daripada KDNK terikat dengan perdagangan yang menambah nilai kepada ekspor Kanada dan Mexico ke Amerika Syarikat, bahagian tertinggi dalam kalangan ekonomi Asia. Sementara itu, Taiwan dan Vietnam lebih terdedah kepada ekspor China ke Amerika Syarikat, bermakna mereka boleh terjejas teruk oleh ketegangan perdagangan Amerika Syarikat dan China. Walaupun tarif Trump menyasarkan 3 negara untuk menangani ketidakseimbangan perdagangan, negara yang mempunyai lebihan perdagangan tertinggi dengan Amerika Syarikat juga dilihat berisiko dikenakan tarif selanjutnya. Di Asia, China, Vietnam, Jepun dan Taiwan mempunyai lebihan perdagangan terbesar dengan Amerika Syarikat. Sesetengah ekonomi Asia juga menghadapi risiko daripada tarif timbal balik kerana Presiden Trump mengarahkan rancangan untuk tarif balas ke atas negara yang mengenakan tarif yang lebih tinggi ke atas import Amerika Syarikat daripada yang dikenakan oleh Amerika Syarikat. Baik, seperti yang dilaporkan, Malaysia menjadi antara sasaran untuk tarif Trump ini. Jadi bagaimana untuk kita bersedia? Jadi kita berbincang lanjut terus bersama dengan Profesor Madya Dr. Ahmad Razman Abdul Latif, pengarah program MBA Putra Business School PBS. Assalamualaikum Prof. Mungkin pertama sekali kalau boleh Prof kongsikan bagaimana tarif baharu yang dikenakan oleh Presiden Trump ini akan memberi kesan khusus kepada sektor ekspor utama Malaysia seperti semikonduktor, farmaseutical, keluli dan juga aluminium. Silakan Prof.
Ya, terima kasih Nabilah. Apabila kita melihat impak kepada ekspor Malaysia terutamanya dalam sektor semikonduktor ataupun biasanya ianya melibatkan industri elektrik dan elektronik, kalau kita lihat ianya adalah satu industri yang menyumbang agak besar kepada KDNK negara kita, lebih kurang 120 bilion, dan dari segi ekspor menjelang 2025 ni dijangka pendapatan ekspor kita yang merangkumi industri elektrik dan elektronik ini adalah sebanyak 495 bilion ringgit. Dan apabila kita melihat pengumuman oleh Presiden Trump tentang tarif yang mahu dikenakan ke atas beberapa industri, sudah tentu ia akan memberi kesan kepada sektor ekspor utama Malaysia. Namun kalau kita lihat laporan terkini oleh Bank Negara Malaysia, masih lagi menjangkakan ataupun menganggarkan bahawa pertumbuhan KDNK kita akan kekal positif tahun ini 4.5% hingga 5.5%. Jadi apa signifikan kepada orang kata unjuran positif ekonomi kita? Ini bermakna walaupun ada kemungkinan tarif akan dikenakan kepada sektor tertentu, tetapi kita melihat masih lagi ada ruang untuk orang kata perundingan. Dan juga kalau kita lihat tarif yang dikenakan kepada negara seperti China, Mexico dan Kanada itu adalah negara dagang utama Amerika Syarikat yang mengalami perbezaan defisit yang begitu besar. Tetapi bagi Malaysia, mungkin kita lihat impaknya wujud, tetapi tidaklah yang saya lihat akan menjadi begitu ketara, akan menyebabkan langsung terjejas ekspor kita, kerana ianya masih lagi bergantung kepada permintaan dan penawaran. Jika masih lagi ada permintaan daripada Amerika Syarikat dan jika mereka masih mahu membayar tarif yang dikenakan pengimport daripada Amerika Syarikat itu, maka kita akan masih lagi mendapat permintaan. Tetapi saya tidak melihat sektor industri seperti semiconductor, pharmaceutical ni dia akan dikenakan tarif setinggi 25%. Mungkin ada kenaikan tetapi masih lagi saya yakin ada ruang untuk perundingan dan ianya masih lagi juga bergantung kepada permintaan dan penawaran daripada Amerika Syarikat.
Prof, seperti yang Prof katakan, kita masih lagi menggunakan pendekatan tunggu dan lihat, dan pada setakat ini KDNK dilihat orang kata dijangkakan Bank Negara Malaysia masih lagi positif ataupun pada kadar yang orang kata masih stabil. Tapi kalau kita nak lihat kesan jangka panjang dan juga jangka pendek yang boleh dijangkakan Malaysia akibat tarif ini, mungkin apa yang boleh kita sedia dari segi strategi, apa yang Malaysia ataupun kerajaan boleh buat dari segi persediaan untuk orang kata cushion the impact, Prof?
Ya, apabila kita melihat pengumuman memang ada berlakunya kesan jangka pendek, terutamanya kalau kita lihat pergerakan ringgit itu sendiri. Rasa semalam ringgit agak merosot sedikit kerana kita akan menghampiri pengumuman oleh Presiden Trump pada 2 April ini, iaitu masa itu baru kita akan nampak berapa banyak kadar yang akan dikenakan, dan ini yang menyebabkan berlakunya situasi tidak menentu dari segi pergerakan ringgit dan juga indeks bursa saham KLCI, dan ini sesuatu yang memang kerajaan ataupun bank negara sentiasa memantau. Kita lihat apa yang berlaku di Indonesia apabila rupiah jatuh teruk, maka berlaku intervensi daripada Bank Indonesia. Dan apa yang kita melihat ini adalah sesuatu yang masih lagi dalam pemantauan kerajaan dan masih lagi terkawal. Dari segi jangka panjang, sudah tentulah kita mahu kerajaan memastikan bahawa kita tidak terlalu bergantung kepada beberapa negara dagang utama seperti Amerika Syarikat dan China, kerana kita telah lihat beberapa tahun sejak kebelakangan ini apabila berlaku sesuatu ketidaktentuan, sesuatu isu yang melibatkan China dan Amerika Syarikat, kita mudah terkesan. Dan saya lihat jangka panjangnya jika kita masih berterusan bergantung kepada dua rakan negara utama ini, kita memang akan sentiasa mengalami situasi seperti ini yang menunggu respon daripada mereka sebelum kita dapat membuat apa-apa tindakan susulan.
Jadi bagaimana bergerak ke hadapan tarif ini mungkin mempengaruhi imbangan perdagangan Malaysia dengan Amerika Syarikat? Sebab kita tahu trade partners kita adalah Amerika Syarikat, ni antara yang tertinggi selain China. Jadi bagaimana bergerak ke hadapan, apa yang boleh kita jangkakan, Prof?
Okay, kalau kita lihat imbangan perdagangan Malaysia dengan Amerika Syarikat, memang Amerika Syarikat defisit dengan kita, tetapi kalau tengok pola trend dia, defisit itu makin berkurangan. Dan apabila makin berkurangan, mungkin kita akan keluarlah daripada apa kata yang dirty 15 dirty 15 tu, mungkin ianya kita tak akan berada di bawah radar lah. Dan saya lihat di sini kita bukannya lah kata satu negara yang betul-betul memberi impak yang besar kepada Malaysia dari segi defisit imbangan dagangan, dan disebabkan itu saya melihat ianya akan lebih orang kata pergi ke keseimbangan, dan Amerika Syarikat sudah tentu akan melihat juga pola dan akan melihat bahawa kita bukannya seperti negara lain yang berterusan meningkatkan defisit, dan disebabkan itu saya lihat apa sahaja keputusan yang diambil oleh Amerika Syarikat mungkin tidak akan begitu drastik. Dan tetapi walau bagaimanapun kita seperti yang saya sebut tadi lah, kita tidak boleh hanya mengharapkan sahaja apa yang akan dilakukan oleh Amerika Syarikat. Kita harus ada strategi lain yang membolehkan kita kurang terkesan dengan apa saja yang berlaku di Amerika Syarikat.
Dan buat masa sekarang kesannya tidak begitu tidak secara langsung dan juga tidak begitu drastik, tapi sekiranya sasaran itu telah bermula terhadap Malaysia, dalam cara apa tarif ini akan mengganggu integrasi antara Malaysia ke dalam rantaian bekalan Amerika Utara, terutamanya berkaitan dengan Kanada dan juga Mexico, Prof?
Okey, kalau kita lihat antara strategi yang kita ambil setakat ini adalah menjalin hubungan perdagangan antarabangsa unilateral di dalam pelbagai perjanjian seperti RCEP, CPTPP dan juga BRICS. dan terutamanya yang melibatkan negara di sekitar rantau Asia Pasifik. Dan apabila kita lihat Kanada, Mexico juga boleh orang kata terlibat dengan aktif dalam bentuk perdagangan antarabangsa seperti ini. Oleh itu memang kita memang ada juga terlibat dalam rantai bekalan Amerika Utara, tetapi kita juga mahu lihat apakah tindakan yang akan dilakukan oleh Kanada dan Mexico. Sebab sekarang ini kita lihat nampak lebih kepada, terutamanya Kanada, lebih kepada bersifat membalas balik tarif tersebut. Dan jika ini berlaku, maka dijangka impaknya kepada dagangan antara Kanada dan US itu akan merosot. Dan sudah tentu kedua-dua negara ini mahu mencari sumber pasaran baharu ataupun mahu meningkatkan dagangan dengan negara lain supaya mereka ekspor mereka tidak terjejas. Dan di situlah mungkin peranan Malaysia juga amat penting untuk memastikan bahawa jika mereka menukar strategi pasaran mereka, Malaysia masih lagi kekal di dalam rantaian bekalan negara-negara tersebut.
Prof, mungkin terakhir dalam berbagikan 2 minit, mungkin sudah tentu syarikat-syarikat di Malaysia akan merasai impak itu, mungkin secara tidak langsung, tapi bagaimana mereka, syarikat-syarikat ini boleh kurangkan risiko yang berkaitan dengan gangguan rantaian bekalan yang disebabkan oleh tarif ini? Mungkin apa yang boleh mereka siap siagakan?
Ya, apa yang kita boleh lihatlah mereka yang mungkin rasa terjejas untuk mengambil kesempatan di dalam tahun ini yang mana Malaysia menjadi pengerusi ASEAN, dan apabila kita menjadi pengerusi, salah satu tanggungjawabnya adalah untuk menarik lebih banyak pelaburan masuk ke rantau ini dan termasuk juga di negara kita. Dan oleh itu pemain-pemain industri yang mungkin akan terkesan dengan tarif yang dikenakan oleh masyarakat ini harus juga meneroka alternatif pasaran, sebab terutama di rantau Asia dan Asia Pasifik ini. Kerana kalau kita lihat unjuran Bank Dunia juga, rantau yang akan menikmati pertumbuhan ekonomi yang lebih tinggi, lebih positif berbanding rantau lain adalah rantau Asia Pasifik berbanding di Eropah dan juga Amerika Utara. Oleh itu, peluang yang ada adalah sebenarnya memperkukuh lagi hubungan perdagangan di rantau Asia ini, meneroka pasaran yang belum diteroka sebelum ini supaya berlakunya kata diversifikasi ataupun kepelbagaian pasaran yang mengurangkan berlakunya impak-impak seperti yang kita alami sekarang lah.
Baik, terima kasih diucapkan kepada Profesor Madya Dr. Ahmad Razman Abdul Latif, pengarah program MBA Putra Business School, atas perkongsian itu tadi. Dan segala perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital AstroWani dan juga astrowani.com, dan kita akan berhenti rehat seketika, kembali selepas ini.
Nak coklat? Hari ni tak boleh. Nanti saya kena dengan mak saya.
Pepsodent baharu disahkan halal. Mikrokalsium aktif dan Proflorida kompleks membantu memperbaiki lubang halus akibat makanan manis sebelum menjadi kaviti untuk perlindungan maksimum. Pepsodent.
Uniform Tentera Darat Malaysia TADM bagi peserta program latihan khidmat negara tidak seharusnya menjadi isu hangat.
Jenayah penipuan pelaburan mencatatkan jumlah kerugian tertinggi pada tahun ini setakat 2 Februari lalu.
Kementerian Pendidikan memandang serius isu peningkatan trend penggunaan rokok elektronik.
Lembaga Lebuh Raya Malaysia LLM memperluaskan larangan kenderaan berat memasuki lebuh raya pada waktu puncak di beberapa jajaran terpilih di sekitar Lembah Kelam.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Baik, bertemu kembali dalam Niaga AWANI dan kita akan teruskan dengan perbincangan seterusnya, di mana Bursa Malaysia meneruskan kenaikan untuk hari ketiga berturut-turut pada Khamis, didorong oleh keyakinan baharu pelabur dan penyusunan semula strategi. Dan Malaysia muncul sebagai pasaran berprestasi terbaik di Asia hari ini, menekankan peningkatan daya tahan dan daya tarikan dalam kalangan pelabur. Dan pada 5 petang semalam, FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI atau FBM KLCI meningkat 1.16% atau 17.68 mata untuk mengakhiri paras tertinggi harian 1,535.73. Jadi untuk berbincang lanjut mengenai pasaran dan juga prestasi Bursa Malaysia ini, kita bersama dengan Syed Muhammad Kifni, Syed Kamarudin, Ketua Strategi MIDF Research. Baik Syed, mungkin pertama sekali kalau kita lihat bagaimana mungkin Syed boleh kongsikan prestasi FBM KLCI sepanjang minggu ini memandangkan berapa faktor mungkin mempengaruhi pergerakan pasaran saham tersebut.
Terima kasih atas jemputan ke AWANI. Sepanjang minggu ini, indeks FBM KLCI naik sebanyak 30 mata atau 2% dan ditutup pada paras 1,536 pada hari semalam. Kenaikan harga di pasaran saham tempatan dan juga serantau minggu ini adalah seiring dengan rebound atau lantunan harga di pasaran saham Amerika Syarikat. Ianya berikutan beberapa laporan media menyatakan bahawa pihak pentadbiran Amerika Syarikat mungkin akan melaksanakan cadangan tarif terhadap barangan import pada kadar dan skop yang lebih terhad daripada anggaran awal. Selain itu, pengumuman data ekonomi Malaysia yang baik juga menarik minat pelabur. Semenjak akhir minggu lepas, pengumuman data ekonomi seperti kadar inflasi bulan Februari yang lebih rendah dari jangkaan dan pengumuman leading economy index atau indeks hadapan ekonomi bagi bulan Januari yang lebih tinggi memaparkan hala tuju yang menjurus kepada kesinambungan dalam pertumbuhan ekonomi Malaysia. Kenaikan indeks FBM KLCI sepanjang minggu ini boleh juga dilihat sebagai aktiviti bargain hunting atau buruan harga murah setelah kejatuhan indeks tersebut sebanyak 5 minggu berturut-turut. Kejatuhan mingguan berturut-turut dari 1,590 hingga ke bawah paras psikologi 1,500 mata. Itu pula didorong oleh kejatuhan di pasaran saham Amerika berikutan kerisauan para pelabur akan kenyataan pentadbiran Amerika Syarikat untuk melaksanakan tarif barangan import dengan skop yang lebih menyeluruh dan pada kadar yang lebih tinggi. Ugutan mengenakan tarif utama terhadap rakan dagang utama Amerika Syarikat seperti Kanada, Mexico, China dan Kesatuan Eropah membimbangkan pasaran berikutan jangkaan kesannya terhadap perdagangan antarabangsa dan juga kadar inflasi. Di samping itu, data ekonomi Amerika Syarikat terutamanya berkait consumer confidence atau keyakinan pengguna juga menunjukkan penurunan yang menimbulkan kerisauan para pelabur kerana struktur ekonomi Amerika Syarikat yang sangat bergantung pada perbelanjaan pengguna. Perlu dinyatakan bahawa perbelanjaan pengguna menyumbang hampir 70% kepada KDNK Amerika Syarikat. Juga US Economic Surprise Index atau indeks kejutan ekonomi Amerika pula jatuh ke tahap negatif. Ini menunjukkan prestasi data ekonomi Amerika Syarikat telah underperform atau berada di bawah jangkaan pasaran.
Baik, itu adalah sedikit sebanyak rangkuman prestasi FBM KLCI sepanjang minggu ini. Tapi kalau boleh saya kongsikan juga berkenaan kaunter atau sektor mana yang mendahului dan mana yang mengalami kejatuhan.
Sepanjang minggu ini, 11 daripada 13 sektor didagang pada tahap yang lebih tinggi. Indeks sektor pembinaan mencatat kenaikan tertinggi sebanyak lebih 5% sepanjang minggu ini. Manakala indeks sektor penjagaan kesihatan pula mencatat kejatuhan sepanjang minggu ini. Prestasi indeks sektor pembinaan pada minggu ini dipacu oleh lantunan harga-harga saham, terutamanya syarikat gamuda yang memiliki nilai pasaran tertinggi dalam sektor tersebut. Kenaikan harga syarikat ini disandar terutama kepada prospek syarikat yang baik dengan order book atau nilai kontrak yang dijangka akan terus meningkat dan juga keputusan kewangan syarikat yang menunjukkan peningkatan dalam jumlah keuntungan. Manakala kejatuhan sektor penjagaan kesihatan pula adalah berkait kejatuhan saham-saham syarikat pembuatan glove atau sarung tangan seperti Top Glove dan Harta Lega yang masing-masing jatuh sekitar 4 hingga 6% sepanjang minggu ini. Syarikat pembuatan sarung tangan mengalami tekanan persaingan harga terutamanya dengan pesaing dari juga pesaing-pesaing lain yang baru memasuki pasaran.
Baik, kalau kita saksikan akhir-akhir ini FBM KLCI telah menunjukkan prestasi yang orang kata ke arah yang positif, menunjukkan peningkatan. Kalau sebelum ini kita ada saksikan naik turun FBM KLCI itu di antara 1,400 hinggalah 1,450. Tapi mungkin bergerak ke depan, apa jangkaan Syed hala pergerakan pasaran saham dalam masa terdekat?
Setelah mengalami kejatuhan beberapa minggu berturut-turut, indeks FBM KLCI mula melakukan base building atau pembinaan dasar pada julat antara 15.10 sehingga 15.40 mata. Dalam masa dekat, pergerakan saham antarabangsa dan juga tempatan dilihat akan terkesan oleh pengumuman pelaksanaan tarif oleh pentadbiran Amerika Syarikat yang bakal diumum pada 2 April atau pada hari Rabu minggu depan. Sekiranya kadar dan skop tarif yang akan dikenakan itu melebihi jangkaan pasaran, ianya akan mengakibatkan kesan negatif terhadap pergerakan harga-harga saham. Dan juga sebaliknya, jika kadar dan skop tarif yang dikenakan di bawah jangkaan pasaran. Pengumuman tarif ini dijangka akan merangkum ke semua negara-negara rakan dagang Amerika Syarikat termasuk Malaysia. Nilai ekspor Malaysia ke Amerika Syarikat adalah sekitar 13% dari jumlah keseluruhan nilai ekspor Malaysia. Dagangan luar Malaysia yang diversified atau pelbagai dilihat akan mengurangkan kesan tarif terhadap ekonomi negara sekiranya ekspor Malaysia ke Amerika Syarikat tertakluk kepada tarif baru yang akan diumumkan nanti. Oleh itu kami berasa cautiously optimistic atau optimis namun berhati-hati bahawa pergerakan menaik FBM KLCI akan dapat kembali semula dalam masa beberapa bulan akan datang. Ada beberapa faktor yang dilihat akan menyumbang kepada jangkaan pemulihan pergerakan menaik pasaran ini. Pertamanya, asas ekonomi Malaysia yang baik dengan kadar pertumbuhan KDNK dirambah tumbuh 4.6% bagi tahun ini, dan seiring jangkaan pertumbuhan berterusan ekonomi makro, kemungkinan korporat juga dijangka akan terus berkembang dengan kadar yang baik tahun ini. Keduanya, kami jangka akan berlaku kemasukan semula dana-dana asing untuk memacu kenaikan harga-harga saham para pelabur antarabangsa yang dilihat akan memilih untuk masuk semula ke emerging markets atau pasaran membangun secara amnya dan pasaran Malaysia khasnya berdasarkan asas ekonomi yang baik dan didorong oleh jangkaan lantunan semula nilai mata wang asing termasuk ringgit berbanding dolar Amerika. Dan akhir sekali, jangkaan pemulihan pergerakan menaik indeks FBM KLCI ini didokong oleh nilaian yang relatif murah, nilai valuation yang murah. Pada masa ini, indeks FBM KLCI didagang pada nisbah harga pendapatan, PE ratio, sekitar 13.5 kali. Tahap ini adalah di bawah purata 10 tahun historikal sebanyak 16 kali.
Baik, terima kasih diucapkan kepada Syed Muhammad Kifni, Syed Kamarudin, Ketua Strategi MIDF Research. Dan pada waktu ini saya akan tunjukkan prestasi dan juga data bagaimana FBM KLCI itu bergerak sepanjang satu minggu ini. Kalau boleh saya tunjukkan di sini untuk setakat hari ini 28 Mac 2025, FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI berada pada paras lebih kurang 1,529.56 turun sebanyak 0.40% dan 6.17 mata. Dan kalau boleh saya tunjukkan prestasi Bursa FBM KLCI dalam sepanjang minggu ini bermula dari hari Isnin. Kita dapat saksikan ia bermula ataupun dibuka pada paras yang rendah iaitu sekitar 1,506. Namun memasuki hari seterusnya, hari Selasa, ia meningkat sedikit melepasi paras 1,510 iaitu 1,512.43 dan terus menunjukkan prestasi yang positif, menunjukkan kenaikan selepas hari ke hari. Rabu, hari Khamis hinggalah hari Jumaat mencatatkan kenaikan tertinggi hampir mencecah 1,540. Namun pada setakat hari ini pada jam 9 suku pagi, 9:11 pagi, parasnya ataupun prestasinya adalah lebih 1,500 29.75. Ini apa yang dapat kita kongsikan berkenaan dengan prestasi FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI, dan Bursa Malaysia akan ditutup selama 2 hari untuk memberi ruang kepada musim perayaan ataupun sambutan Hari Raya Aidilfitri untuk minggu hadapan, Isnin dan juga Selasa. Dan saya kira itu saja prestasi selepas ini, dan kita akan tunjukkan lagi berkenaan dengan perkembangan antarabangsa. Jadi kita berhenti rehat seketika, kembali selepas ini.
Malaysia sebenarnya berada di kedudukan kedua terburuk di dunia berkaitan keseimbangan hidup dan kerja.
LRT3 sudah akan mula beroperasi suku ketiga 2025. Kerja-kerja fizikal dan penstrukturan sudah mencecah 95%.
KPM sebenarnya sedang memperincikan cadangan untuk menyediakan allowance kos sara hidup tingkatan 6.
Libat urus antara umat Islam dan agama lain penting supaya dapat mengelakkan ataupun membawa kepada Islamofobia.
Bersama kami dalam Bombastika Riot.
Rasai kemeriahan konser terbuka selebriti kegemaran ramai.
Macam mana nak buat benda-benda jadi viral?
Ada strategi sendiri. Lain macam keseronokan yang dikongsi bersama.
Itu khas untuk Hari Raya.
Malam penuh kegembiraan dengan Bombastika Raya di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
Welcome back to Niaga SPOTLIGHT, and here's some international updates, where Indonesia's currency neared a record low against the US dollar on Wednesday as the country's central bank said it's ready to intervene to stabilize the rupiah. The rupiah was trading at 16,580 per US dollar at 0738 GMT on Wednesday. LSEG data showed hovering near the all-time low of 16,800 touched in June 1998 during the Asian financial crisis and just after the fall of Indonesia's authoritarian leader General Suharto. On Tuesday, the rupiah hit a post-crisis low of 16,640 before the central bank intervened to defend the currency. A central bank official said on Wednesday that Bank Indonesia stood ready to stabilize the currency, although he would not comment on whether the central bank had intervened on the day. Investor confidence in Indonesia has been waning as worries grow about President Prabowo Subianto's massive social spending plans, budget cuts and the cancellation of a tax hike. Prabowo's ambitious program to provide free meals to more than a quarter of his people at a cost of 71 trillion rupiah has brought scrutiny from investors. The launch of a new sovereign fund, Antara Indonesia, has also raised concerns over potential political interference despite Prabowo's insistence the fund could be audited anytime and by anyone. As the global auto world reeled from the potential fallout of Donald Trump's new auto tariffs, one name stood out as less affected than others, which is electric vehicle maker Tesla. The Texas-based company's shares were the rare automotive stock to trade in the green in U.S. action, as Analisis said Tesla's supply chain and financial performance may not be affected by the wide-ranging levies that will affect global shipments of both cars and car parts to the United States, mainly due to the company's largely domestic production. Still, that relief in the United States, where Musk has become one of President Trump's primary advisors tasked with swiftly cutting federal spending, may not improve the brand's reputation worldwide. Tesla shares have plunged more than 40% since peaking in mid-December as a protest movement against the EV company has erupted in the US and around the world as the Musk-led Department of Government Efficiency has drawn heavy criticism for going after federal workers. The stock was up about 2% on Thursday. The 25% tariffs are expected to disrupt the global automotive industry, raise the cost of vehicles in the United States, and pinch automakers' earnings. Shares of Ford, General Motors and Chrysler parent Stellantis were down between 2.1% and 7%. While Tesla does import some parts from around the world, the company largely produces its vehicles in the United States. Analysts expect Tesla to report deliveries of about 398,000 vehicles when it reports figures for the first quarter next week, according to 20 analysts polled by Visible Alpha. Trump said the duties announced on Wednesday could be the net neutral or even good for Tesla, adding that his close ally Musk did not advise him regarding auto tariffs. Tesla imports lithium-ion batteries from China's contemporary Amperex Technology Limited and other automotive parts from countries such as South Korea, Japan and Mexico, according to import filing data through the end of February provided to Reuters by Importieti.
It's going to affect every automaker different. Of course, no automaker wants to incur an extra cost for bringing their cars into the U.S. The goal is to get many of those manufacturers to build their cars in the U.S. And the truth is, many of them do. In fact, Hyundai is opening a gigantic facility in Savannah, Georgia, for the purposes of building electric cars, electric car batteries, and electric car components. So that's going to help them in the long run. Some companies have already seen this coming and begun moving their manufacturing inside the U.S. Kia, another good example. Toyota has built cars in the U.S. for many years. Honda, Nissan not only builds cars in the U.S., they have an engine plant as well. Mercedes-Benz, same thing. The problem is with these types of answers is it still varies model by model and brand by brand. Just because Mercedes-Benz builds cars in the U.S. does not mean they build all their cars in the U.S. They build some of them. Same with other manufacturers. Nissan, another good example. Well, most manufacturers, if hit with a 25% tariff, would likely have to pass some of that cost on to consumers. There's no way that most automakers can absorb all that themselves. They're going to have to pass some of it along to customers. But what we don't know is how much, when, and what percentage. So think of it this way. A higher priced car has an ability to absorb a price increase. They can create different packages. They can offer different features. They can even reduce the profit on that car slightly if it's, say, a $100,000 car. On a car that costs less than, say, $40,000, there's really no place to absorb that cost. And so that's going to have an impact, which unfortunately are a group of consumers who can least afford to have a price increase.
All right, Canada will wait until next week to respond to the latest U.S. threat of tariffs, and nothing is off the table regarding possible countermeasures, Prime Minister Mark Carney said on Thursday. Carney told a press conference that he would speak to provincial premiers and business leaders on Friday to discuss a coordinated response to the auto sector tariffs that U.S. President Donald Trump announced on Wednesday.
In our judgment, certainly my judgment, it doesn't make sense when there's a series of U.S. initiatives that are going to come in relatively rapid succession. To respond to each of them, we're going to know a lot more in a week, and we will respond then. And in a negotiation, it doesn't make sense to tip your hand and say what you're going to do going forward. So,
one option for Canada is to impose excise duties on exports of oil, potash and other commodities. Carney broke off from campaigning ahead of an April 28 general election to make the announcement. He is calling on voters to give his Liberal Party a strong mandate to deal with Trump.
The S&P 500 ended lower on Thursday as investors grappled with U.S. President Donald Trump's latest trade tariff announcement that hit shares of General Motors and Ford. Trump unveiled on Wednesday his plan to implement a 25% tariff on imported cars and light trucks, effective from April 3rd, while the duty on auto parts begins on May 3rd.
Investors are also bracing for a wave of reciprocal tariffs Trump plans to unveil on Wednesday, although the president has hinted there may be room for flexibility.
Yeah, markets today, frankly, look similar to what we saw yesterday, and it has, with increasingly frequency in the last couple of weeks, where it's just a lot of flip-flopping. It's a reversal day. Futures looked stronger in the morning, and it just kind of slowly drained out throughout the end of the day. Gold has got a bid, as has Bitcoin, which is kind of interesting. But again, it's generally seeing a lot of investors, repricing growth, repricing the AI trade, starting to favor more defensive stocks. And again, all of this is directly tied to concerns about what the tariffs are going to look like, when and if they're going to, come in earlier, or if April 2nd is going to be the so-called Liberation Day. I joked to an investor earlier this morning that, markets don't like tariffs, markets don't like uncertainty, and markets hate tariff uncertainty. And I think that's just what we're seeing.
The S&P 500 lost 18.89 points, or 0.33%, to end at 5,693.31 points, while the Nasdaq Composite lost 94.98 points, or 0.53%, to 17,804.03. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 155.09 points, or 0.37%, to 42,299.7.
Right now, let's take a look at the latest overview of the S&P 500 index as of this morning. This is from finviz.com. As you can see, it's a mix of green and red over here. But I'm going to start with the auto sector, where Tesla shows the color of green, which was up by 0.39%, and the stock price is 273.13. But under the same sector is GM, General Motors, shows a red color. It was down by 7.36%, and the stock price stood at a level of 47.20. And the last one for the Ford is down by 3.88%, and the stock price right now is 9.9%. And this is mainly due to effective of Trump's latest announcement on tariff. But latest updates on these three stocks prices as the global auto world reeled from the potential fallout of US President Donald Trump's new auto tariffs. One name stood out as less affected than others, which is electric vehicle maker Tesla, and shares of the Texas-based company were the rare automaker to trade in the green in US action on Thursday, as analysts say the EV maker's supply chain and financial performance may not be as affected by the wide-ranging levies that will impact global shipments of both cars and car parts to the United States. This is mainly due to the company's largely domestic production and supply chain. Still, that relief in the United States, where Tesla CEO Elon Musk has become one of Trump's primary advisors, may not improve the brand's reputation worldwide. All right, that's on the update of Ford, Tesla, and also General Motors. But moving on to Meta. Meta shows sort of a darker red color. It was down by 1.38%, and the stock price is 602.58, and similar sector or similar companies or stock price under communication service is Google. It was down by 1.83%, and the stock price is 164.08. But the latest updates on Meta is about where two former Meta artificial intelligence executives has raised $15 million for Utori, a startup that will develop AI personal assistants, the company said on Thursday. And the round was led by Rob Tews at Radical Ventures, with participation from other investors like Felicis, which is the AI godmother Fei Li, and Google DeepMind chief scientist Jeff Dean. And San Francisco-based Utori is a part of a slew of AI startups creating autonomous agents or systems that use AI to perform actions on their own. And that's latest updates on Meta. And moving on to NVIDIA, which is semiconductors, shows sort of a red color here, and it was down by 2.05%, and the stock price stood at the level of 111.43. And a similar sector is Broadcom, down by 4.06%, and 171.99 for the stock price. But the latest updates on NVIDIA: CoreWeave plans to reduce the size of its US initial public offering and price its shares below the indicated range, as a person familiar with the matter told Reuters on Thursday, dampening expectations that the listing would boost investor appetite for IPOs. And the NVIDIA-backed cloud services provider is now looking to sell 37.5 million shares, 23.5% less than original planned, and price them at $40 apiece, well below even the low end of the indicated range, the source added, requesting anonymity, discussing confidential information. But NVIDIA will anchor the CoreWeave IPO at the price with a $250 million order, the source said, and the sale would raise about $1.5 billion and value CoreWeave at about $23 billion on a fully diluted basis, according to Reuters calculations. And that's the latest updates on US economy and also US stock markets. We have a lot more updates after this with my colleague Tehmina Kaoosji. So we'll go for a short break. We'll be right back.
Uniform Tentera Darat Malaysia TADM bagi peserta program latihan khidmat negara tidak seharusnya menjadi isu hangat.
Jenayah penipuan pelaburan mencatatkan jumlah kerugian tertinggi pada tahun ini setakat 2 Februari lalu.
Kementerian Pendidikan memandang serius isu peningkatan trend penggunaan rokok elektronik.
Lembaga Lebuh Raya Malaysia LLM memperluaskan larangan kenderaan berat memasuki lebuh raya pada waktu puncak di beberapa jajaran terpilih di sekitar Lembah Kelam.
Majlis Datuk Seri Siti Nurhaliza memeriahkan raya ini bersama artis jemputan. Dengan Majlis Siti 2025, 5 April ini. Meriah lain macam di Astro dan Astro Go.
Apa signifikan dengan pengumuman ataupun berita yang keluar dari media China ini berkaitan dengan hasrat Malaysia untuk menyertai gabungan BRICS?
Kita mahu dapat lebih banyak umpamanya pelaburan daripada negara China.
Kalau melihat kepada Akta Kanak-Kanak 2001, adakah kita terlalu lambat untuk melihat proses untuk meminda akta sedia ada?
Kita perlu ada penyelarasan. Kita tak mahu bekerja secara silo.
Hari Raya meriahnya lain macam.
Hari Raya memang penuh dengan kegembiraan.
Lebih meriah bersama bintang-bintang Gegar Vaganza musim ke-11.
Raya yang hebat. Selamat Hari Raya, adik kakak serta ibu bapa.
Selamat menyambut Hari Raya Aidilfitri Maulana Batin.
Gegar Vaganza Raya di Astro dan Astro Go.
Ha, raya dah dekat. Kalau box Astro dekat kampung belum connect wifi, connect lah. Kan ada beribu-ribu program boleh stream di TV bila-bila masa je.
Nama adik siapa?
Saya cintakan awak, Rayana. Cinta tu boleh dipupuk. You gonna be my wife. Serius tak? Betul persaudaraan.
Barulah meriah lain macam raya nanti.
Gempur di AWANI 7.45.
Nak stream bola tapi data pula tak cukup. Kalau minta Cik Mahira pasuk wifi, agak-agak dia bagi tak? Cik Mahira?
No. Tak payah nak bodek-bodek ni.
Yelah kan boleh guna 4 peranti serentak. Nanti tak adalah kacau dia. Cik Mahira, password?
Okey.
Tak lawak ya?
Lawak ke? Ye!
Cik Mahira.
Stream Dia Imamku bila-bila masa apa jua cara sehingga 4 peranti mudah.
Di era digital, pemasaran bukan hanya tentang penjualan semata-mata. Penceritaan menarik jadi kekuatan dalam membina hubungan perniagaan, tingkat pengetahuan, perkasakan perniagaan anda. Saksikan segmen JWSME dalam program Awani Pagi dan Niaga AWANI setiap Isnin hingga Khamis di saluran 501. Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah jiwa SME, Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight takes us through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now this week on Analysis, we're discussing the sandwich generation crisis. Malaysia's sandwich generation, which is typically individuals aged 40 to 60, are facing dual challenges: financial pressures and the burden of caring for aging parents while also raising their own children. Now, this is particularly pronounced for middle-income households. This demographic is also disproportionately female, highlighting deep-seated gender norms and systemic gaps in care infrastructure. In fact, a 2025 survey revealed that more than 95% of elderly parents receive support from their children, which can encompass financial aid, personal care, and also household assistance. However, with life expectancy rising and birth rates declining, in fact, women's life expectancy increased by 17.3% from 1970 to 2017. This overall caregiving burden then intensifies. Notably, only about 5% of seniors have EPF, Employees Provident Fund, savings to last beyond age 65, which exacerbates financial strains on caregivers. Looking at also sandwich generation, men's well-being is also deeply impacted with financial strain due to dual responsibilities, which can result in emotional and as well as psychological impacts. There is then the scarcity of affordable quality elder care services, which compounds these challenges for both men and women from the sandwich generation. Niaga Spotlight today focuses on policy options, rights-based approaches, and also strategies to alleviate the sandwich generation's burden. I'm joined in the studios by Chai Senting, Senior Research Officer with the Malaysian Research Institute on Aging, My Aging at University Putra Malaysia, UPM, together with Dr. Fatima Al-Atas, Department of Sociology and Anthropology, International Islamic University, Malaysia, IIUM. A very good morning to the both of you. How are we doing?
Good morning.
Thank you for making time for us. Dr. Fatima, especially feeling a little bit under the weather.
Yes,
but,
a little bit.
All right, but let's start off the discussion anyhow. Chai, perhaps if I could get us started off with looking at Malaysia's policy frameworks and how can we actually reimagine them to not only address this growing economic strain which is on the sandwich generation, but also looking at a rights-based approach. For starters, let's actually focus on an often neglected demographic, which is the challenges and unique pressures being faced by women and men in particular.
I think it's a good place to start as any because traditionally, even in government policies, the government has emphasized a lot on the role of the family in the care of older persons. Of course, children, that's by default. But the fact of the matter is that if you notice that many of our policies, including our tax breaks, are actually designed to help family members fulfill what we call the filial piety roles. So hence the tax breaks are given to adult children, they are given to claims of medical expenses of parents, even buying devices. In the last budget speech, the Prime Minister actually added a new tax break actually for elder care, whether it's residential or non-residential services, home and community-based care that could be deducted under the personal income tax. But on the other hand, the severe situation here is that we are in a transitionary phase. When we say transition, it means that some things that have been performed by women at home and now is being commodified, that would be the right word, or monetized. Yeah, I'm not going to say monetized, but that's just another word. But basically, this is the issue now because of financialization of our lives. You can see that we have more services provided by the private market, but families would have to purchase them. So it is a little bit like a situation where, you know, in the past we do not have public health hospitals, or in the past we do not have a pension system. All this has emerged, and this is expected of the government. So as time moves on, the population's expectations of the role of the state will change. Because in the past, we are not expecting the government to take care of the elderly. We are also not expecting the government to take care of children. But nowadays, we felt that, you know, falling fertility rates, increasing life expectancy, the state must do something. So you can see how gradually the government exploring through the new concepts like care economy. So that is why these things are happening in recent years, because the state's role is increasingly becoming in demand to take over, or I would say to support families. And this is what's happening now.
Absolutely. I think that gives us a good lens into what some of the shifts and changes have been policy-wise. But of course, all the discussions around care economy have to lead to investments in a care infrastructure, as well as fiscal policies that allocate adequately. So moving from there, thank you for that, Chai. Dr. Fatima, can I ask about looking from, of course, a sociological perspective, the disproportionate caregiving burden on women? Let's look at what gaps are existing and what gaps that you feel can actually be overcome Of course, this is not a short-term thing. Let's look at perhaps within a generation. How can we gradually shift the norms which disproportionately place the direct care, at least, on women in the Malaysian sandwich generation?
Thanks so much, Sam. I like that you highlighted the economic, financial, monetary issues, because I think what's happened to Malaysia includes those changes of how we live, because it centers around our lives or our social lives, right? How we live, how long we spend at work now has changed a lot in the last few decades. Maybe we used to think about work as a 9-to-5 kind of process, but now more people work beyond 9-to-5 process, and then the boundaries of work and life sort of it's very loose. People do extra work. There's TikTok 24/7 where people are buying and selling at the same time. So this is just like a broad look into what our lives look like. So people do gig economy work. So there's a variety of ways in which people perform paid work, but then there's also the unpaid work that still has to exist, because that's how we live. We all need care. We always need care all the time, from even before we're born until after we die, because care is something that is required for all of us. So we need to think about that in that way, that it starts even before we're born and it has to continue on even after we die. Somebody needs to take care of us, and we need each other in that way. So there's the economic shift, but then there's also the time, I would say time poverty. We're losing time. We're not just, thinking about things turning into something that has to be paid always, but also thinking about how much time we're losing. And it's not proportionate to everybody. It's not the same. For some people, you give your labor and you get a certain amount. For other groups, you give this labor and you get this amount.
Yeah.
And then we're talking about the unpaid work, right? So then you're talking about gender, because before, when we think about life before, one person works, and that's sufficient to care for the family. So the other person usually does the unpaid care. So this is gendered in a way that usually the person that goes out to do the paid work is the man, and the woman stays at home to do the unpaid work. Whether it's equitable or not, we can always, discuss that. But now both members usually work. It's usually a dual earner family.
You do need to have a double income, given the cost of living.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
and wage depression.
Yes. So not only do we need to work more hours, more people in the family need to do paid work. But the care work was not ever talked about in terms of now who's going to do the care work, right?
Very true.
So for a long time, we've gone through this, what we call a cultural lag, where, even the women have gone into work, but men haven't really stepped up to take on the unpaid care work. So in terms of thinking about the future and how we want to see shifts, then we need to address that. Because we've been addressing we need to do the economic side.
Sure.
Women need to go to work, contribute to the economy, the family's economy.
Or not be the ones who stay out because of the existing or increasing care burden.
Yeah. So the shift now has to be that, now we have to look at how can we talk about this side, who's going to do this together? How do we incorporate? It doesn't take so long. It shouldn't take so long, because it didn't take long for girls to quickly, outdo boys actually in school and to enter the job market. But because we didn't address that part, we see women going back to,
lagging behind.
Yes.
Yes.
So if we don't address that, then that happens. So I think in terms of thinking about the shifts, I'm quite optimistic about it. If we actually pay attention to it and we put, things together, actions together, I think shifts can happen in a generation. I don't think that it's something that is, too difficult. And I think that thinking of that being too difficult is what makes it something that why we haven't changed it, because we always think that it's something that's so natural to only women doing it. But if we think it's just about learning to do things differently, then we can do it quickly. I think it less than a generation.
Perhaps even, I think it's actually ongoing right now, because when you mentioned, people living lives where they're doing gig work, which can also involve selling on TikTok, I was just thinking about how popular, for example, fathers who are actually social media figures who do care work around the home, how popular they become. I think it's speaking to an existing dynamic within households, as well as the fact that it is excellent role modeling. Yeah. So moving from there, Chai, I'd love to now look at drawing from what Dr. Fatima was speaking about. There is this gap, but at the same time, looking at the rising cost of living and increasing longevity, let's focus on Malaysia's financial policies. You've got retirement savings, the schemes, taxations and pensions, but what more needs to be done in a much more targeted manner as perhaps financial incentives for caregivers? And this is those who are already existing within our communities and in households.
As Dr. mentioned, I think the main issue here is that women often have to make a choice, and this is unfortunate because care demands, care work demands are unpaid. So naturally, if you stay home and be a housewife and caretaker or caregiver, then you don't get any pension plans. So I understand the policy developments in what we call ISURI and SOCSO's Housewife Social Security Plan. So I think the government is cognizant, they're aware of these developments. You can't at one hand say that I want to increase the female labor force participation rate to 70% or 60%, and at the same time we are not making provisions to secure their future, which is all women's future. But at the same time, there are also other policy options that we can consider, like a basic pension solution. Then it doesn't matter whether you have worked or you have not.
Right.
Global trends in pension reforms is to understand that everyone in the society requires some form of income protection and security in later life. So when you have these state pensions funded sustainably, then what you can see now is that people will have more options to say that maybe I don't need to work. I want to do care work or do something else. Then families have more options. But now families do not have that option. It all has to come out from the main breadwinner or the financial earning. And sometimes that's why both couples work. I think families are quite a resilient structure. I mean, in family studies, we say that the families make decisions that are the best for their situation. So when the government look at the statistics and say that, hey, how come our women participation rate is not so high? Maybe that's a symptom of the fact that maybe one person earning income is enough. Or perhaps I think the truth would closer to be, if I come out and work, it will be a left hand to right hand scenario. Where I make all my earnings, but I'm going to pay all the caregivers, childminders.
Exactly.
And that's not exactly cost efficient.
Exactly. And also observing the existing gender pay gap that quite often results in a so-called choice being made, which is actually one that exists due to structural issues. So what about any thoughts, Chai, on perhaps a means-tested caregiver allowance so that it can actually meet urgent financial needs, particularly for those who would be outside of urban areas, let's say rural areas, where also paying for caregiving due to accessibility and infra lack is not actually much of an option.
Yeah. We have 2 or 3 approaches. Currently, the Department of Social Welfare do give out Bantuan Penjaga Pesakit Terlantar, or BPT as they call it, meaning it's assistance for caregivers who take care of bedridden family members. But of course, this is means tested, as you mentioned, and it's only applicable to people from the low-income households. So that's one way of going about it. The other way we can think about is that think of the household as one unit. So you can actually adjust the what we call social accounting for that household, that particular household, in terms of its care burden. So how many disabled persons in the home, whether there's elderly requiring care, whether there are young children in the household, and you can do these adjustments to the income tax base. So let's say I live in a household where I earn, and then I'm taking care of 7 people, let's say. Then perhaps the tax structure and treatment would be a little bit different. We don't need to collect too much info on how they spend their money. We only need to actually say that by default, this household is sustained by this income. And once the characteristic of the household is understood, that is why I say that we need to have tools such as family registries or household registries. We need this information so that policymakers can have more, I would say, precise interventions, rather than we say that you are a caregiver and then you have to apply. That works the other way around. You have to apply for it. And then that might be a hassle that some of them are not willing to make. And the cost of mean testing is another issue. So we have to think of solutions where they are embedded into the current system, like how the government just recently announced that probably the new petrol subsidy will be given through identity cards, our IC. So that's making use of a structure that exists, but how do they determine their eligibility?
Yes,
These are all
operationalizing the challenge, right? Yeah.
So that is why I said the Bantuan Pesakit Telantar is also not widely known.
Very true. Unless you're already working within the sector.
Correct.
So awareness matters.
Rural area families or households might find it to be quite a hassle to go and apply for it. And these are all limitations where we go by an application and a means-tested aid. These are some of the shortcomings. But
understood.
As a temporary stopgap measure, as something to alleviate the situation of care, this is where the Department of Social Welfare and the government should think about, can we expand this program? It's a little bit like the Bantuan Warga Emas. Yes, we don't have a state pension, but if we, in the meanwhile, while we come up with the pension reforms that probably will take time, maybe we can actually expand some of these programs to meet the needs of those households and families who actually are waiting or requiring public support, so that they don't have to go to the press all the time to raise funds or whatsoever. But there are mechanisms that we can put in place.
Well noted. Thank you very much for that, Chai. And drawing from what Chai was explaining, Dr. Fatima, of course, we've got a huge lack of comprehensive respite care services. Let's think about how we can look at intergenerational care models and creating them so that those who are already within the elderly segment can also contribute via something which is more community-based to alleviating the sandwich generation's burden for care for children.
I really like this question, Tim, because I think when we think about intergenerational care models, we think about, it's something to look outside, what other countries have done, but it's actually just going back to what we used to, and it's not that far away in the history of, how we used to live. We used to live...
The kampung feel, right?
Yes. And we used to live in a community where we take care of each other, and it's very common. For example, I asked my students in class, have you ever just gone to your neighbor's house and eat lunch? Right. That's something that seems very simple, but if you live in an urban area, it's as though you can't go to your neighbor's house and eat lunch, or your kids can't just go there without you being judged as being a bad parent. Similarly, in thinking about building communities like that, it's not really that far away from our culture, from the Malaysian culture to take care of each other, right? So it's really thinking about this concept of shared responsibility. So we can have a more institutionalized intergenerational care model. For example, putting preschools together with elderly care, which has been done in other countries, but also in thinking about our neighborhoods. And I think this is really important to think about how our infrastructures are being designed now and how we live. And I think we haven't put care into thinking about it and into the policies around how we build infrastructures, because we sort of separate socioeconomically where people live, and not every housing spaces are thought in terms of thinking about disabilities and age groups and care and how do we get people in and out, or whether it's child-friendly or not. So having a more inclusive kind of living arrangement for everybody brings the community together, because that's part of it. And thinking about, we want people to sort of live together so that we have better empathy, because we see people of different age group, different ethnicity, different socioeconomic, groups. So we learn to understand each other's problems. And I think some of these problems always are seen as solutions as soft, but these soft solutions are what we're missing. And that's why we have these problems we have today, because we haven't really thought about the soft parts. We're always thinking about, economic things. We're thinking about laws, but we're not thinking about how do we build the soft parts of our community and our societies together. So in thinking about intergenerational models, although we want to have the institutionalized ones, we also must work towards, sort of
Self-help.
Yes, self-help, but also, making it come together again. How do we create environments where we can allow people to build that again so that we can let our neighbors' children eat at our house and we can ask how people are doing? Because I was always thinking about how now we build our houses so our doors don't meet the doors of our neighbors, so we never have to bump into each other. But bumping into each other is something we need to do, so we know who's living in front of us. Are they well? How long have they not been at home? Things
Very
like
true.
that shows that we care about each other. And so if we're a country that thinks about that, then we would build that into the infrastructure as well, into the way that we live our lives. So we have time to ask our neighbors how they're doing, to have time to check in on elderlies, and so to build that into our day in a way that it feels more organic rather than we have to ask for it. Yeah.
Or like a burden after all, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Chai mentioned the care burden. I hope that we can change the term into care value, in terms of when we do our tax deduction, how much care value are you putting in?
Right.
How many people are you caring for? So it's a value rather than a burden.
It's a perspective shift, I think, and particularly when you were speaking about fostering these intergenerational housing models, all I was thinking about was the fact that this was so common for anyone who's a full adult today. I'm talking about anybody maybe 30 above 35 years of age in Malaysia, to have actually grown up with this feel where your neighbors always directly knew where you were as the child of another neighbor, and this was never an issue. So perhaps not so much going back to the good old days, but trying to take away the best parts of it when it came to naturally caring for the community around us. But perhaps it speaks of a need to launch perhaps even a small pilot project. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to federal or state governments. This could even be done on community initiatives, public-private partnerships, and once it is modeled, it receives the appropriate type of coverage in media and otherwise, we can see how it actually works in a practical manner to close those gaps.
And I think it also inspires the self-help part of our communities, because sometimes a lot of people who are part of, like, for example, the Surau community or the temple community, they want to do things, but maybe they haven't seen some samples of ideas of what can be done.
Yeah, but perhaps it's there in the memories of the adults today, and we can help reject that again. Thank you. Thanks very much for the discussion so far, Dr. Fatima and Chai. We take a quick break now. We'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight, looking at, of course, the sandwich generation crisis. Do stay tuned.
Sasaran subsidi diesel di Semenanjung tidak akan memberi kesan kepada harga barangan keperluan di Sabah, Sarawak dan Labuan.
660 individu berusia bawah 21 tahun di Sarawak telah diberikan kewarganegaraan.
Sarawak kini menjalinkan kerjasama dengan Bank Dunia dalam menjayakan perdagangan karbonnya.
Ima tak salah kalau dia boleh godam sistem bank untuk mencuri.
They all been like... You're straight into a trap.
Kau dah cakap aku.
Kita ambil alih. Kau bunuh semua budak-budak kau.
Kau tahu apa nak buat?
No, Ibu Zara. Hapuskan menteri korang. Mana duit tu? Setan duit tu pergi. Aku takkan biarkan.
One Cent Thief Season 2. Stream ke semua episod on demand. Dan episod akhir di Astro Citra dan Astro Go.
Daulah tuanku.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji, and today we are analysing and looking at Malaysia's sandwich generation crisis and some measures by which the burden can actually be alleviated. So, Chai, let's go back into the conversation and looking about Malaysia's cultural attitudes towards caregiving. Of course, it is shifting, that it should be primarily only women who have these care responsibilities, but can policy interventions help to shift this, especially as, organically speaking, more men are also taking on these caregiving responsibilities?
Well, we have a lot of examples, actually. A geriatrician retiring early to take care of his mother, And we have many examples nowadays. But the core issue here is actually about whether men will be able to step up, not just in family-based care, but also in the care industry, meaning that we cannot assume and by default that the care workers will all be mostly women. At the moment, it's roughly about 60-70% from our studies. So, and they occupy different spaces, so they usually are the supervisory roles or they are at cleaning roles where they require bodily, physical work. So the question here, of course, is also the value of care work at home performed by men as well as self-care. They need to have some basic skills, cooking, cleaning. Those might not be direct care responsibilities, but they can at least alleviate some of the burden of a woman at home. So I think at the end of the day, we now have a lot of what we call paid services, whether it's cleaning services or care services, as you mentioned. There's also a question of acceptability, affordability, and accessibility of these services, because the elderly themselves might not feel too comfortable being taken care of by a stranger. So these are expectations that has to be breached. That means that, adjustment comes from both ends, not just the supply, but also the demand. So for the private market and households, the situation is really about how can we actually empower families, training family caregivers to take care of their own family members, because they lack resources. They don't know who to turn to.
Very
so
true.
Support
and care
groups,
needs are very multidimensional.
Exactly. Support groups are needed. ADFN has been excellent in doing it for dementia patients and family caregivers. But at the same time, we also need to actually professionalize the care workforce. And that's another issue. And that's something that we need some form of a standardization or registration, because we have spaces in the regulatory framework where home-based care is strictly not regulated. There's really nothing governing that.
No oversight.
No oversight. So it creates this space where a lot of it is based on contractual agreements, based on trust, and try and error as we move on. But I believe that for the government to effectively support this space, you call it home and community-based care, then we need to also have a structure where we recognize these efforts by communities, by businesses, by NGOs to actually provide these caregiving help, not just to the elderly, even to nursing recovery adults, rehabilitation, or even child care. One of the biggest issues I feel is that we seem to think that over time, as families, shrink in size, the responsibilities of care is actually increasingly becoming an issue within families. Then the real problem here is that perhaps that's the reason why fertility rates are falling. Perhaps that's the reason why people are not getting married. They felt that, am I getting married for getting into a trap while I'm getting married? So the question here is really about values. It's really about how the state is able to reframe and restructure. They can't just be asking for increased female labor force participation rate without considering that how is it affecting the family institution in general. So I think over time, people, the masses, will be more accepting of state interventions. For example, we already have accepted EPF,
That's right.
for so many years. It's almost unthinkable to not have them. But we are still taking some time and struggle to get the public to accept some form of a contributory health insurance or long-term care insurance. So these are structural developments that will come for us as a country. But I think it will take some time. So as mentioned by Dr. earlier, that we need some self-help approach, that the community will have to work until the state, is ready to implement some new measures or new solutions for families.
Absolutely. I really hear you on that, especially looking at the fact that it will take some time, but in the interim, Dr. Fatima, let's zone in on what was mentioned earlier, which is acceptability of care services and outsourcing beyond the domestic arena. Let's talk about what type of perhaps campaigns or public awareness could help raise it, particularly for the target demographic for this.
So I think when we think about acceptability, we're thinking about how care is perceived by the society, and it's very cultural, and it's also, when we talk about care, it's very personal. And I like that you already mentioned that care is not just thinking about elderly care, we're talking about child care, people who maybe going through maybe short-term illnesses or maybe chronic illnesses, having children with disability. So in thinking about acceptability of the community, we can maybe think about childcare as an example, because we've had childcare for some time now.
Sure.
And I think in the beginning, yes, there are still some parts of our community that feel that, you know, rather than sending a child to a caregiver, it's better to have care at home. And I think it's not that we want everybody to think that paid care is better than care at home and care with family. Of course, there's value in both, and there's a necessity to have both, and you know, to be able to choose and have the choice of choosing both, but also to acknowledge that, number one, people must be convinced that there is quality in the care. I think that's why we had challenges with childcare, because we continue to have these challenges too, not just we had, but it's something that's still people having issues with it. Is because of the quality. And then the other one is accessibility and affordability, the other two. So we have to think about care in that way. But in terms of highlighting or addressing the cultural aspect, it's shifting the idea of saying that, or it's convincing perhaps certain communities or our family members, for example, in thinking about how we share love or how we communicate love with each other, because this is a very human aspects of our lives, and we're used to, in sociology we say doing love. You know, how do we do love and how do we communicate love with one another?
Cooking a meal,
yes,
acts of love,
yes.
right? Yeah.
So, but that shift, right now, even if I buy Grab, you know, my children might not think that I'm a bad mom, and I'm not doing love labor, for example. But it's also rethinking those things. So that definitely takes time, because it's something that's very value-based and often generational value-based. So addressing those things, once we've addressed quality, accessibility, and affordability, then we have to talk about how we can, as a family, discuss perhaps in a more personal space how love is, you know, perceived, and how we can perform acts of love in other ways that may not look as how we are used to, because of shifts in our lives and how we live our lives today.
Exactly, and that was actually making me think of the fact that, let's say, take out food, but that also costs a certain monetary value, and that is hours spent because you love the family that you're providing for. Yeah, so much to think about. Very interesting discussion and so far. Chai, let's go into looking at social enterprises or PPPs, public-private partnerships, which could be developed in Malaysia to support the sandwich generation, or there are already some existing models, perhaps in their fledgling stages, which my agent has been made aware of, and thoughts on this.
I think it's fantastic that private-public partnerships are happening. Petronas have been organizing a few series of social innovation competitions and incubations for social enterprises and startups, where they try and provide, you know, innovative services to the community on a sustainable model. It's not NGO-based approach, but it's more like a business approach, so that is sustaining. And from these incubations and startup work, we have now a few of them, Tumpuan Malaysia, where there's Jom Makcik. So all these are new ways of doing care work, you know, or presenting care services. And the success of Grab and the idea of, you know, on-demand services models have brought some change to the way we think and approach the problem. Even at the Institute, we are now actually trying to pilot a Meals on Wheels program for seniors.
Okay, and what would that look like?
Yeah, and of course we have them. We have the food service that families subscribe to, Mangkok Tingkat, kan? That you can actually get food catering on a daily basis. And you also have what we call soup kitchens, you know, where Kuchara or some of the charitable groups distribute
Tiratana Welfare Society, another good
distribute
example.
free food to the needy. So our idea here was that you have new technologies like rethought packaging. Rethought packaging meaning that you have food that are sealed and they can last longer, and the shelf life is longer, and you can just leave it outside. You don't have to have a fridge. So reheating is just about putting in hot water or putting in a microwave. So the idea is that is there a way we can deliver such Meals on Wheels program more efficiently, more effectively? So for example, we don't have to go there every day. So you reduce the cost of traveling. And you have all these pre-cooked, ready-to-eat meals that the elderly can choose from. And you can deliver it to them and, they can sort it out. When do I want to eat it? And it won't go bad immediately. And there's no preservatives because the rethought packaging is really about high heat, high compression food preservation. So the idea here is that for us researchers, we're always constantly trying out different ways to improve existing models and structures and hope that if it works, if it's proven to be viable in terms of cost, in terms of manpower, we can actually introduce something new, new way of doing things. So I think we are very thrilled with the social enterprise space because even existing care providers are thinking out of the box because they might be running a residential daycare facility for an elderly or whatsoever, but they now say that since I'm already doing it, why don't I offer home-based care? Why don't I offer community-based care, respite? And some of them go as far as actually thinking about a new business arm, you know, trying to do among the homes to run some activities or provide industry services to one another. So I think these are all very positive developments and only made possible because there is a network. And there is an understanding that we have to collaborate and the demand is always there. The real question here is how do we come in, as you mentioned, in a culturally acceptable way. And when we first organized the first convention of caregivers, residential caregivers, we have heard so many interesting ways of doing the business. Some of them actually only operate from Monday to Friday.
Okay.
And then they said, you can take your parents home on Saturday and Sundays. You know, and some of them gave very interesting perspectives that, the family have to be responsible for the medication of the elderly in our center because they say that at least they'll meet their children, at least they'll meet their family, or else if everything is being done by the service provider, they'll probably just pay through a bank transfer and they'll never follow up or have interactions with their family members.
So encouraging a continuum of some care, right?
So I think that's where, you know, cultural shifts are really difficult. You need to get the people to say that, abandonment is when you put an elderly in a home. But it is not abandonment when you put elderly in a facility and you constantly visit them on a daily basis or even every weekend because you believe that professional care and help is much better than them being left alone at home without supervision. So I think these are narratives to be had, but at the same time, we must make sure that the industry provides a service. We should not abuse it, or we should not say that it replace certain roles of the family. Similarly with the state provisions, it should not take away from the role of the family, the kinship relations and the expressions of love, the different ways of expressing love, you know, in the past and today is probably very different. In the past, probably they say that you must stay together with the seniors. But with modern housing limitations, it could be a challenge. Yeah, it could be a challenge. It's probably better that you live nearby and then you have a lot of support. You might be even staying overseas, but you, as all those good ads tell you, if you call your parents via Zoom or whatsoever, that's some form of expression and maintaining of social relationships.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's also about harnessing existing structures and ensuring there can be some continuity to it. Dr. Fatima, to sort of close out and round off this discussion by refocusing again and looking at the impacts mentally as well as physically, specifically on men from the sandwich generation, what kind of community role can be played to alleviate this noted increase and uptick, especially in the past few years, and it's only going to go ahead and become even more pronounced in, let's say, the next decade or so?
I think when we talk about men, what's interesting is that when we saw the shift of women going to work, and that why the cultural lag was able to happen was because women can still take on the extra care. But when we're talking about the sandwich generation and women, also going to work, then, it's really to a point that we can't do this unless we share the responsibility. So then the question of men being part of the conversation becomes really, really
urgent.
Yes, urgent. But at the same time, we have to think about also the structures, whether we have thought about improving the structures around it, in terms of ensuring that leave policies, for example, also include men, that men also, like women, have options to, leave work for a while. In fact, Malaysia has been talking about flexible work for a long time, but always the focus is always on women, that mothers get to take flexible work. But we still need to do some work on our flexible work arrangement. For example, in some countries, they have a right to request for certain hours, so people don't need to totally get off work. You can work, for example, instead of 40 hours, 20 hours of work a week, and still have an income and still have that social engagement and intellectual kind of fulfillment and all of that, and then still 20 hours be able to do the care work. And if you have 2 siblings or 3 siblings, then you could share that, and that becomes very doable. So even if a son wants to take care of the parents, or a father wants to take care of the son or the children, then this becomes something that's doable. So in terms of structure, the structure of policies must be present in order to address that. But I think more than policies, what we've seen in other countries that are similar in terms of our culture is that cultural stigma around breadwinning and men bringing in income. So it's really addressing that, and that has to do with a lot of issues around masculinity, because also part of the expectation is men don't talk about their problems, men don't confide in others. So it sort of puts men in such a cramped space that, they have a guilt of wanting to take care of their elders. Maybe they want to now. There's more realization of the role of fathers at home. They want to be part of the children's lives as well. But at work, they're expected to, fully be on board.
To not be the one who leaves, even though you are also a parent.
Yes, and not to maybe also discuss in spaces where it's, friendly spaces to talk about, hey, I have a problem with trying to manage. Women have these conversations all the time, and we sort of take care of each other in terms of, sharing notes or telling this is what you can do, and confiding each other.
Managing that mental, emotional load.
Yes, so addressing that need as well. So it's recreating the narrative for men, and I think I feel quite optimistic when we look at studies of millennial fathers or fathers in this generation. They're rethinking what fatherhood means and how they're doing fatherhood. And if we're thinking about the sandwich generation, we also have to hope that or we have to sort of design a space where this is more encouraged, that support groups for sons taking care of elderly parents are talked about, and what are the resources available for men to reach out, so that we create this environment. We're so connected, yet we're disconnected. We have our phones with us all the time, but we just have to sort of create this environment. If we don't meet face to face, at least we have a group of men who are able to talk to each other about the load and how they can because we haven't talked today a lot about the caregiver load and the toll of the caregiver. So maybe just briefly to address that, because that's a very real concern. And before this, we've talked about a lot of issues relating to women and securing women's social security and ISURI and all of that. But if men are to take on these roles, and I think this makes it better and easier for us to think about as a whole, that it's not just a women's problem, it's a caregiver problem, and this includes...
And it's a social issue. Dr. Fatima Chai as well, thank you so much for a really interesting conversation, and we hope that your key expert insights and policy recommendations are taken not just bit by bit, but as a whole. Thanks a lot for the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight, focusing on the sandwich generation crisis with me, Tehmina, Kaoosji, and panel experts. We'll see you again next week with more economic analysis. Here's to a productive week ahead.
Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Saya Nazri Kaha, ini agenda AWANI. Saban kali kita melihat apabila kita memasuki musim perayaan, ramai di kalangan pengguna ataupun rakyat akan mengeluh barang keperluan harian akan naik dan seumpamanya. Adakah benar begitu? Ataupun setengah-setengah pihak, terutamanya peniaga, mengambil kesempatan kerana keperluan akan bertambah ataupun demand permintaan di kalangan pengguna akan bertambah apabila memasuki musim perayaan, dan mereka mengambil kesempatan dengan permintaan yang tinggi. Ataupun kita melihat rakyat sekarang semakin celik, mereka mampu memilih, membuat pilihan yang bijak. Mana keperluan barangan yang mahal mungkin mereka ketepikan dahulu, mereka mencari alternatif yang lebih murah dengan pembelian-pembelian pukal dan seumpamanya. Jadi untuk berbicara bagaimana persediaan Kementerian Perdagangan Dalam Negeri dan juga kos sara hidup dalam musim perayaan Ramadan yang sedang kita lalui pada ketika ini dan akan datang beberapa hari saja lagi, iaitu menjelang Aidilfitri, berkaitan dengan inisiatif rahmah dan juga apa juga keperluan berkaitan dengan barangan pengguna dan seumpamanya. Jadi saya mak bertuah pada malam ini yang berbagi Datuk Seri Muhammad Sayuti bin Bakar, Ketua Setiausaha Kementerian Perdagangan Dalam Negeri dan juga kos sara hidup. Assalamualaikum Datuk Seri, apa khabar?
Waalaikumsalam, khabar baik.
Terima kasih Datuk Seri kerana sudi bersama saya Nazri Kaha malam ini, walaupun dalam kesibukan lah. Saya rasa tim KPDN memang cukup sibuk dalam bulan Ramadan dan juga menjelang Aidilfitri ini. Tetapi mungkin secara permulaan ini, Datuk Seri, bagaimana mood orang ramai berbelanja untuk 2025 ini kalau kita boleh bandingkan tahun-tahun dahulu, terutamanya selepas kita berhadapan dengan COVID-19?
Terima kasih Saudara Nazri, terima kasih juga kepada agenda AWANI dan juga Astro kerana sudi menjemput saya pada malam ini. Dan kalau ditanya berkaitan dengan mood, saya fikir selepas COVID tu, kita lihat dari segi trend berbelanja tu meningkat, dan begitu juga pada tahun ini ada peningkatan di trend berbelanja, cuma ada sedikit persaingan. Kalau dulu kita lihat persaingan tu agak kurang, kerana sekarang ni kita tahu perniagaan secara dalam talian, atas talian ini
macam-macam
begitu popular. So itu antara mungkin yang memberi saingan kepada peniaga yang kebiasaan berada di bazar-bazar dan sebagainya. Itu mungkin antara cabaran yang kita nampak ada perubahan besar lah.
Tapi kemerihan tetap meriah.
Kemerihan tetap sama, saya fikir.
Sampai 2-3 pagi penuh lagi.
Ya, kalau kita lihat sendiri,
kalau pesta-pesta, bazar dan sebagainya.
Kita di Putrajaya pun ada bazar. Betul. Dan bila kita pantau selepas tarawih itu, itulah tempoh menjadi tumpuan orang ramai kita nampak sekarang.
Ya, bukan hanya di Putrajaya, Datuk Seri, kan? Hampir daripada Perlis hinggalah ke Sabah. Ya. Okey, Datuk Seri, menjelang Aidilfitri ini sinonim dengan saya rasa mungkin persepsi ataupun sebahagiannya ataupun sebilangan kecil ada kes-kes berkaitan dengan peningkatan harga barangan dan sebagainya, terutamanya hal-hal berkaitan barang yang sudah pun dimasak, makanan yang sedang dimasak, persiapan-persiapan untuk Aidilfitri dan seumpamanya. Jadi apa langkah-langkah intervensi yang dilakukan oleh pihak kerajaan, khususnya KPDN, untuk mengurangkan tekanan di kalangan pengguna dan rakyat dalam hal ini?
Okey. Di peringkat KPDN, khususnya kita memang sentiasa prihatin akan keperluan khususnya untuk kita menangani isu-isu berkaitan dengan kos sara hidup, kerana nama pun kementerian kami ini memang bertanggungjawab.
Tak boleh lagi dah. Tak boleh lagi. Kos sara hidup je KPDN.
Ya. Dan ada beberapa inisiatif yang kita telah laksanakan bermula seawal Ramadan. Yang pertamanya kita telah lancarkan Bazar Ramadan Rahmah yang bertujuan untuk memberi peluang kepada mereka yang kurang berkemampuan juga boleh mendapatkan juadah-juadah di bazar-bazar Ramadan ini dalam kadar kurang daripada harga RM5. Dan program ini kita adakan kerjasama bersama dengan PBT sendiri. Dan setakat untuk tahun ini 2025 ada 95 bazar Ramadan Rahmah kita panggil. 95. Seluruh negara. Seluruh negara. Dan kalau kita lihat di Selangor sendiri pun ada 9. So apa yang kita cuba bantu di sini adalah kita bekerjasama dengan peniaga, dengan PBT supaya mereka boleh menyediakan sekurang-kurangnya satu menu Rahmah yang kita panggil, yang harganya setakat ini masih maksimumnya RM5.
Di bawah RM5.
So dengan adanya menu ini, golongan yang kurang berkemampuan juga boleh bersama-sama untuk menikmati juadah berbuka puasa lah. Dan dalam masa yang sama, ini adalah merupakan satu manifestasi kerajaan Madani dalam kita nak menyantuni masyarakat yang kurang kemampuan di dalam dalam satu kerangka Malaysia Madani itu, dari segi aspek kebersamaan dan juga ihsan. Itu yang kita cuba tunjukkan supaya semua orang juga kita terangkum dalam usaha-usaha dan inisiatif yang dilaksanakan oleh kerajaan.
Ya. Selain daripada itu, Datuk Seri, ada juga dikatakan jualan Rahmah Madani. Mungkin ini Datuk Seri nak, ini memang popular lah, memang ditunggu-tunggu oleh rakyat. Mungkin Datuk Seri nak elaborate lebih sikit. Okey,
berkaitan dengan jualan Rahmah Madani, betul. Ini merupakan satu produk yang popular, yang dinanti-nantikan oleh masyarakat di luar sana, khususnya pada hari-hari yang mereka terima gaji.
Betul.
Kalau kita dibuat awal ni, mereka kata mereka belum ada. So permintaan adalah pada hari gaji kalau boleh buat jualan Rahmah. Jualan Rahmah ni kita mulakan sejak 2022 lagi. Inisiatif ni di bawah, salah satu inisiatif di bawah payung Rahmah. Dan pada tahun 2023 kita tingkatkan lagi program ini dan kita mensasarkan jualan ini mengikut setiap Dewan Undangan Negeri dan juga Parlimen. Dan alhamdulillah daripada sambutan yang begitu baik yang kami diterima untuk program jualan Rahmah Madani ini, tahun ini 2025 kerajaan telah pun menambah peruntukan daripada 200 juta kepada 300 juta, tambahan 100 juta. Dan saya di peringkat kementerian melihat ini merupakan satu tanggungjawab yang besar, Aziz. Sebab tambahan 100 juta itu bukan sedikit.
Betul.
Dan
ini untuk rakyat tu Sri.
Untuk rakyat. Dan apa yang kita di peringkat kementerian telah pun rancang tahun ini, kita akan pertingkatkan lagi bilangan program ini, di mana kita mensasarkan sekurang-kurangnya 2 kali di setiap DUN. Kita ada 600 DUN dan campur ada 13 parlimen di wilayah persekutuan. So kita sasarkan, insya-Allah sekurang-kurangnya kita perlu laksanakan sebanyak 15,360 kali. Itu minima
sesi
jualan Rahmah ni. Dan kemungkinan lebih. Dan tahun untuk makluman juga, pada tahun 2024 kita telah dapat melaksanakan jauh lebih daripada apa yang kita sasarkan. Itu insya-Allah
lebih KPI itu ya.
Ya, 2025 juga kita akan laksanakan
ini
lebih.
Ini baru bulan ketiga tu Sri.
Bulan ketiga.
Tu Sri, ni nak masuk raya ni ada jawatan jualan khas Aidilfitri ni. Ini ditunggu-tunggunya nak beli daging lah, ayam lah, sayur-sayur lah, sampul ketupat dan sebagainya kan. Minyak masak dan sebagainya.
Okey, dalam jualan rahmah madani ini selain daripada yang biasa kita memang ada jualan rahmah madani bertema. Bertema ni kebiasaannya kita ikut musim-musim perayaan dan sebelum ni kita dah ada jualan rahmah madani bertema untuk Tahun Baru Cina dan kali ini untuk Aidilfitri juga ada yang kita akan adakan dan dia sebenarnya bermula pada hari ini pun sudah ada. Dah ada. Dan kita akan juga adakan di beberapa lokasi untuk jualan rahmah ni rahmah bertema ni sempena Aidilfitri ni di setiap negeri. Selain yang dah ada hari ini dah mula dan hujung minggu ni pun ada lagi yang kita akan laksanakan
sebelum sampai Aidilfitri untuk persiapan.
Dan untuk rahmah bertema ni kebiasaannya kita akan menyediakan barang-barang untuk keperluan perayaan itu
barangan khusus lah. Tuan Sri, selain barangan keperluan untuk sambut Ramadan, sambut Aidilfitri dan sebagainya, tetapi di kalangan kita ni pun bersiap siaga untuk pulang ke kampung dengan kenderaannya, dengan nak bawa ahli keluarga dan sebagainya. Kos untuk servis kereta pun bukan calang-calang sekarang ni, Tuan Sri,
betul.
Dengan harga minyak hitam, minyak pelincir dan sebagainya dan juga barang-barang spare part dan sebagainya. Adakah ini juga diberi tumpuan oleh pihak KPDN untuk menolong mengurangkan beban rakyat dalam hal menguruskan hal kenderaan mereka?
Okey, sebagaimana yang saudara Nazir sebut tadi memang betul. Selain daripada persiapan juadahnya, bajunya, ada lagi satu yang kadang-kadang kita agak leka,
terlepas pandang.
Tetapi benda itu penting.
Betul.
Kerana kenderaan yang akan membawa kita pulang ke destinasi kita
elok,
ni perlulah elok dalam keadaan yang baik dan yang paling penting paling selamat. So untuk itu kami di KPDN ini telah pun menyediakan satu program khusus yang dinamakan Servis Ihsan Madani.
Ini pertama kali, Tuan Sri?
Pertama kali kita rintiskan baru-baru ni pada perayaan Tahun Baru Cina. Dan untuk makluman Nazir dan juga penonton juga, sebenarnya ini inisiatif ni cetusan idea yang berhormat Menteri kami sendiri, Datuk Almizan
ni idea.
Dia sendiri mencetuskan dan alhamdulillah program ini telah mendapat kerjasama daripada Petronas. So kita namakan program ini Servis Ihsan Madani at Petronas Auto Expert. Kenapa kita panggil Auto Expert? Sebab Petronas memang ada satu program di mana ada rangkaian pusat servis ini yang bernaung di bawah Petronas Auto Expert. So untuk servis SIMPAC yang kita panggil ini memberi peluang kepada orang ramai untuk mendapatkan perkhidmatan servis kenderaan. Kita bagi diskaun. Sama juga macam jualan rahmah. Betul. Diskaun 10 hingga 30%.
Banyak tu, Ustaz.
Banyak tu. Kepada minyak pelincir yang digunakan. Ada dua jenis minyak pelincir yang dimasukkan dalam program ni. Yang pertamanya minyak jenis mineral. Yang keduanya semi sintetik lah. Sebab kenapa mungkin orang tanya kenapa kita tak bagi yang sintetik? Sebab sintetik ni biasanya orang yang
mampu lah.
Yang mampu, kereta dia lebih mewah dan mampu lah. So setakat ini kita ada 96 bengkel yang dah pun menyertai program ini. Semuanya di bawah Petronas Auto Expert. Dan satu pembaharuan yang kita buat sempena SIMPAC untuk Aidilfitri ni. Dulunya kita hanya libatkan kenderaan petrol saja. So kali ini kita masukkan juga kenderaan diesel untuk masyarakat terutama di Sabah dan Sarawak
yang ada kenderaan diesel
yang mereka boleh libat sama dalam program ini.
Alhamdulillah.
Dan semua saya nak beritahu bagaimana untuk orang ramai.
Macam mana nak sertai tu?
Mudah saja download aplikasi Settle yang disediakan oleh Petronas. So pergi kepada car service dan di situ akan ada pilihan-pilihan yang mereka boleh buat tempahan dengan mana-mana servis center yang tersenarai untuk mendapat temu janji dan kemudian bolehlah pergi untuk dapatkan servis.
Ini sudah bermula, sudah berjalan tu.
Dah bermula. Kita bermula pada 14 Mac yang lalu dan akan berakhir pada 29 Mac nanti.
Sebelum raya.
So dapatkan peluang ni.
Dia ada had berapa orang ke, berapa kereta ke?
Selagi ada kemampuan kepada
pusat servis
tu, insya-Allah.
Siapa cepat dia dapat.
Siapa cepat dia dapat.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Maklum kat kamu semua.
Seronok dapat raya kat kampung Man, tolong ambil lagi 2 bulan tu. Man, kenapa ni?
Loring tuan kemai. Misi kita bermula. Tak kira bulan puasa. Kita redah hutan belantara. Tak kira lautan gelora. Kita hadap sama-sama. Bang.
Jauh lagi ni.
Korang semua tak balik kampung ke?
Kita balik raya! Macam mana dia boleh hilang?
Uncle Mike, kami dah balik.
Sinilah kampung kami. Tapi, Uncle tak dapat bagi korang rasa raya yang sebenar.
Kami nak raya dengan abah kami.
Saya rasa ini satu inisiatif untuk mengurangkan lagi beban rakyat Datuk Seri dan mereka dapat merasa selamatlah apabila berada di jalan raya untuk pulang ke kampung Datuk Seri. Menarik. Ini yang selalu berkaitan dengan persiapan perayaan ni, harga barang naik, harga barang mentah naik dan harga-harga yang tak masuk akal. Kadang-kadang ni barang kawalan tapi kenapa dijual sekian-sekian harga melebihi barang kawalan. Satu lagi barangan yang sudah pun dimasak, misalnya makanan di bazar, makanan untuk persiapan hari raya dan sebagainya. Kadang-kadang saya rasa susah juga penguatkuasa KPDN nak cek semua, saya rasa tak ada juga ya. Jadi mungkin nak cerita sikit tentang kawalan harga dan juga berkaitan dengan supaya tidak berlaku kenaikan harga yang tidak wajar di kalangan para peniaga kita.
Okey, untuk kawalan harga ni memang itu adalah sebahagian daripada tugas dan juga tanggungjawab khususnya bahagian penguatkuasa KPDN sendiri. Dan sebenarnya kita dah bermula seawal 2 Mac yang lalu.
Seawal puasa kita ya?
Seawal puasa. Sebab kita sedia maklum pemantauan ni kita lakukan lebih awal bagi memastikan tidak ada peniaga yang cukup